Listen, mate, you've got into motoring, and you've become a motoring journalist. First of all, how did you become a motoring journalist? What led you that path?
Oh, I was a cadet, Michael. I was a cadet reporter on the Wanganui Chronicle. I was the last cadet they ever took, so that probably tells its own story.
Oh, God, yeah.
I'd been there for a couple of years, and somebody else on the staff decided it was a great idea to start a weekly motoring publication on the paper. That guy put it all together, and then a week after he started it, he said, I don't want to do this anymore. So George Abbott, the editor, I think, was told on the Monday, and the thing came out on a Friday, so there was a mad rush around the newsroom to find if anybody wanted to put their hand up to write about cars. My family were very much into cars and the vintage car movement, so I'd grown up with old cars and interesting cars and a bit of motorsport, so I thought, and I didn't own a car then, so I thought, this might be an opportunity to be able to drive other people's cars rather than ride my Morrison Monarch 10-speed going from Drew's Ave every day. So, I just started to write about cars, and I sort of fell right into the deep end and managed to, survive.
Okay, and you've been writing about cars ever since, so you've seen enormous trends. I guess one of the big ones, the first one you would have seen would have been the Japanese imports, would it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Japanese used import thing was very much kicked off in the 1980s and was, as you will recall, a major change for how New Zealanders bought cars and how the New Zealand car industry sold cars. So basically, of course, we opened our borders to all and sundry, and there were no rules, and it was a real Wild West.
Certainly was. Having said that, I've heard a lot of people argue that was, in actual fact, a bit of a saviour of New Zealand's. It's one of the reasons why the accident death rate went down, because suddenly we were getting actually better cars coming into the country, even though they were used cars from Japan. Is that right?
I'm not sure. The logic of better cars. The problem, as you know, in retail, the idea is to buy, if you're selling something, you buy it for as cheap as possible and sell it for as much as possible.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of cars that were probably, in Japan they have a test called the Sharkin test, which is basically like a super warrant of fitness. Now that's basically designed to ensure that cars circulate in Japan for a short period of time, usually just 5 years, and then they start heading towards the tip. Some will go into used cars, but many of them they take them off the road because they subsidise their industry. They want Japanese people to always own modern cars. That's good for Japanese auto industry. So the whole thing is incentivised towards that. Now, Japan had a problem, and New Zealand identified that they were a great source for used cars because Japan was crushing those cars, and it was expensive to do it. So New Zealand, of course, could come along and say, well, now we have this opportunity, we have a free market. We'd like to buy those cars and start shipping them to our country. And, initially the Japanese were selling them very, very cheaply. They just thought, these idiots are coming along and buying this stuff and it saves us a big problem, so we'll just ship them out. Now, of course, it's changed completely because they quickly learned over the years that how much profit was being made on those cars when they came to New Zealand, so they wanted a larger slice of the pie. But yeah, naturally enough, the industry gravitated, that used car industry gravitated naturally to buying the cheapest cars they could and selling them for the most they could. So whether or not it actually raised the safety standard, not so sure. New Zealand government ultimately had to bring in safety standards for them to comply with, because generally the age of the cars coming to New Zealand was 7 to 8 years. So they were basically a generation behind the product that was being sold brand new in New Zealand. So it was taking a lot longer to pick up on the technology changes, including at that time safety introductions, which was the whole period when we started to put airbags into cars and anti-lock braking systems into cars and stability controls. They were the big ones.
Okay.
So
now
it's all caught up now. I mean, it's the regulation has changed quite a bit. So to import a car into New Zealand now, it's basically got to be to the same standard that it would be if it to an as new standard.
Listen, I know we're going to talk about electric vehicles in a second, but just it's got me thinking. So when the Road to Zero campaign came through, I mean, this seemed bizarre to me, but I don't know how it struck you, but it just seemed odd. You too?
Yeah, the moment you come up with the moment you come up with an absolute like that, well, I mean,
Yeah.
how could you ever achieve it?
Yeah, that's what I thought too. And then they had that ridiculous ad of all those strange-looking people popping out of a car, and it was just madness. No. The thing that got me about that was that New Zealand, I remember now in the 1970s, since we're talking about 1970s, and this is for people who weren't born then, that 800 people a year were dying on New Zealand roads, and many more maimed and injured. Now I think the death rate's down to 350 or something like that. We're talking about 750, 800 people when there would have been, 10% of all the cars on the road as there are now? Extraordinary times, weren't they, really?
Oh, absolutely. And when you think about it, you think about the average age of cars that were on fleet then. I mean, everybody. I mean, I went to school with a kid who bought his granddad's 1930s Morris. He was driving that to school,
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't out of the ordinary. That was just like, Paul's bought this car.
Yeah.
And so we were driving around in cars that, were pretty lax in terms of basic safety.
Yes, I remember getting scared. I remember thinking as I got in a car, God, I hope I get to the end of the destination on a long trip because so many people were dying. Listen,
I was born in 1961, right? So,
yeah.
And I can remember the debates that occurred in the late 60s, early 70s, I suppose, about, what do you mean I have to wear a seatbelt?
Yeah.
What do you mean I have to wear more than a lap belt? It's got to be it's got to be a diagonal as well, and these retracting seatbelt things, and blah blah blah. So we've come a long, long way from there. Thankfully.
We sure have, and more people have lived.
It's changed a lot now. I mean, cars are heavier now than they used to be, but they're a lot safer.
Thank God for that.
Whereas, they're designed to act as survival cells.
Okay, now, moving on to electric vehicles. In 2019, we'd virtually sold neither fully electric nor plug-in hybrids.
We had them then, yeah.
Oh, we'd sold some, but I mean, as a percentage of their total fleet, it was bugger all. And then from 2020, we go through this amazing rise over 3 years. I think in 2023... something like 27-28% of all cars sold were either electric or hybrid. And yet that's dropped off a cliff. It's down to, I think, about 7 or 8% now. Is all of that due to the fact that there was a subsidy and then there wasn't?
No, not entirely. I mean, the recession probably has definitely hit as well. And also road user charges have impacted. And also, I think we've probably gone through that wave as well of early adopters.
Yeah.
And that's an international trend. In every market that EVs are relevant, you've gone through that initial phase of I've got to buy it and I'll go on a list, and this is what you'd call the Tesla thing, because that's definitely something that happened with Teslas. Suddenly, as soon as Teslas turned up, everybody had to have them. Like you said, they were the iPhone of the car world. Everybody had to have them, and they didn't care how they got them. They just needed to have one and look cool and stand out in the community as an environmental goody good. So so we've been through that wave. The industry expected that. What they didn't expect was a very sudden change in government policy. So, you understand, I guess, and your listeners understand about Clean Car, and Clean Car is in two parts. It's Clean Car Discount, which was designed to incentivise consumers to buy cars, and anything under $80,000 got a subsidy initially of $8,600, and then it got dropped to just over $7,000. And there was also Clean Car Standard, which a lot of people don't understand necessarily, and that was aimed at the distributors. So Clean Car Standard basically said, we want you to sell electric cars, and part of that is that we will penalise you on your CO2 counts, and we set levels every year which gradually drop. So if you're over those average CO2 counts, you get penalised for that. So the way you avoid penalties is sell more electric cars, and then you get credits for that. So your credits can offset your penalties. So, yeah. So this has caused a bit of so all of that was in place. And then Simeon Brown said, we're not going to do clean car discount anymore.